You've walked past it 1,000 times. That stubborn green thing pushing through the cracked sidewalk outside the CVS on the corner. The one maintenance keeps spraying and it keeps coming back. That's plantain, not the banana, the plant. And for over 2,000 years, on every inhabited continent, healers have crushed its leaves into wounds to stop infection. Roman soldiers packed it in their field kits. Native American nations called it life medicine. And in 2020, a peer-reviewed analysis of its primary compound, aucubin, confirmed significant antibacterial and anti-inflammatory activity. Your grandparents knew this plant by feel. Battlefield medics relied on it under fire. Modern science finally caught up. But here's what's wild. Plantain isn't even close to the most powerful one on this list. One of these plants was used in plague hospitals across medieval Europe. Another one outperformed a frontline antibiotic in a controlled clinical trial. And you've probably mowed over both of them this month. Right now, somewhere in your neighborhood, there's a plant growing in a crack, a ditch, or the unmowed edge of a parking lot that has more documented antibacterial activity than most people would ever guess. Not in a jungle, not behind a locked laboratory door, right there in the ordinary margins of your everyday landscape. And the reason you don't know about it is not because the science doesn't exist. It does. The reason is simpler and stranger than that. These plants are too common, too cheap, and too unpatentable to ever become anyone's billion-dollar product. So, they got replaced, not debunked, not disproven, replaced, by things that could be manufactured, branded, bottled, and sold at scale. The knowledge didn't vanish because it was wrong. It vanished because it wasn't profitable. And that's a very different story. This is the part where we start pulling that knowledge back. Let's begin with the one you already met. Plantain, the Trailside First Aid Kit. Plantago major. You've seen it and you've ignored it. It grows flat against the ground in lawns, along footpaths, between sidewalk slabs, in the packed dirt beside driveways. The leaves are oval with prominent parallel veins running lengthwise, smooth with a slightly rubbery texture, and if you tear one in half, you'll notice stringy fibers inside, almost like tiny tendons. It doesn't smell like much. It doesn't look like medicine. And that's exactly why most people walk past it forever. But for indigenous nations across North America, plantain was one of the most commonly used wound plants in their pharmacopoeias. The Lakota, the Navajo, the Shoshone, multiple nations independently identified this plant as a go-to poultice for cuts, stings, and infections. In European folk medicine, it carried the name waybread, and was one of the 9 sacred herbs listed in the Anglo-Saxon Lacnunga, a 10th century medical manuscript. Chinese traditional medicine documented its use for urinary and inflammatory conditions under the name Qeqianzi. 3 continents, dozens of cultures, thousands of years, and the same plant kept showing up. Now, here's where modern science enters. The primary bioactive compound in plantain, aucubin, has been studied extensively over the past 2 decades. Research published in the Journal of Ethnopharmacology found that plantain leaf extracts showed significant antibacterial activity against common pathogens including Staphylococcus aureus and Bacillus subtilis. The plant also contains allantoin, which promotes cell proliferation and wound healing, and tannins that help draw tissues together. People still use it the old way, crushing a fresh leaf and pressing it against a bug bite, a scrape, a sting on the trail. It's not going to replace your emergency room, but for a plant that grows in every temperate region on Earth and costs exactly nothing, the documented activity is remarkable. One ethnobotanist called it the most underestimated wound herb in the Western world. And the reason it's underestimated? It's a lawn weed. You can't patent a lawn weed. You can't charge $38 for something people can pick off the ground. So plantain sits there in the sidewalk cracks, doing what it's always done, while we walk into the pharmacy next door and buy the synthetic version of what it offers for free. It's like having a paramedic living in your front yard and never once saying hello. That same pattern, common, cheap, powerful, ignored, shows up in your kitchen next. And the two plants hiding in there are so ordinary, you probably used one of them today without thinking twice. Garlic, nature's broad spectrum, might be the most aggressively studied antibacterial plant on the planet. Allium sativum, you know the smell. That sharp, pungent, almost burning hit when you crush a raw clove. That smell is allicin, and allicin is one of the most potent, naturally occurring antimicrobial compounds ever analyzed. The moment you crush garlic, an enzyme called alliinase converts alliin into allicin, and that compound starts killing bacteria on contact. The window is short, allicin degrades within hours. But inside that window, the activity is extraordinary. How extraordinary? A 2012 study published in the Journal of Antimicrobial Chemotherapy found that a compound derived from garlic, diallyl sulfide, was 100 times more effective than two common antibiotics at penetrating the biofilm of Campylobacter jejuni, one of the most common foodborne pathogens in the world. 100 times. That's not marginal. That's not a folk remedy performing okay. That's a kitchen staple outperforming pharmaceutical products in a controlled laboratory setting. Other studies have shown allicin demonstrating activity against MRSA, methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, the so-called superbug that resists conventional antibiotics. And this isn't new knowledge. The Egyptians fed garlic to the laborers building the pyramids, not for flavor but to prevent infection in a massive workforce doing dangerous physical labor in desert heat. In World War I, when antiseptic supplies ran low on the Western Front, British and Russian field medics packed crushed garlic into wound dressings. The British government actually issued a public call for garlic donations for the war effort. In Ayurvedic medicine, garlic has been prescribed for infections and immune support for over 3,000 years. The traditional system called it the healer of all diseases, which is an overstatement, but one rooted in very real observation. The texture of a raw clove is firm and waxy, almost like a tiny porcelain bead, and the taste when bitten into is sharp enough to make your eyes water. That intensity is the allicin at work. People use raw garlic topically for skin infections, internally for colds and respiratory issues, and as a general immune supporter. Cooked garlic still has health properties, but the antibacterial punch lives in the raw form within those first few minutes after crushing. And sitting right next to garlic in most kitchens is another antibacterial powerhouse that doesn't look like medicine at all: raw honey, specifically the kind produced from certain floral sources. Honey, the wound sealer. For most people, it's a sweetener. For most of human history, it was a frontline wound treatment. The ancient Egyptians documented honey-based wound dressings in the Edwin Smith Papyrus, one of the oldest known medical texts dating to roughly 1600 BCE. In Greek, physicians, including Hippocrates, recommended honey for ulcers and infected wounds. And for a very long time, modern medicine dismissed this as primitive thinking, until researchers figured out why it actually worked. Honey, particularly Manuka honey from New Zealand, contains a compound called methylglyoxal, or MgO, that gives it antibacterial activity far beyond what its sugar content alone would explain. In 2007, the FDA approved Manuka-based wound dressings for clinical use. A systematic review published in the Journal of the Royal Society of Medicine found honey effective in treating infected wounds and burns, particularly against antibiotic-resistant strains. The mechanism is multi-layered. Honey creates a low pH acidic environment bacteria can't thrive in, produces small amounts of hydrogen peroxide, and physically seals the wound with a viscous barrier. It's sticky, golden, and faintly floral smelling, and it has been saving skin for longer than written language has existed. Two kitchen staples, both dismissed as folk remedies, both validated by modern research at levels that should make anyone pause, and neither one can be patented. It's like discovering the fire extinguisher was in the pantry the whole time. Keep going, because the next one isn't in your kitchen, it's in your lawn, and you've probably tried to kill it. Yarrow, the battlefield herb, Achillea millefolium. Its very name comes from Achilles, who, according to Greek legend, used it to treat his soldiers' wounds during the siege of Troy. That story is myth, but what isn't myth is the documented history of yarrow being carried into actual wars by actual soldiers for actual centuries. During the American Civil War, field medics packed yarrow into bleeding wounds when medical supplies ran out. During the Crusades, European knights carried it in their kits. Lakota healers used it for pain and fever. The Zuni people chewed the root for toothache. Swedish Linnaeus, the father of modern taxonomy, noted that country people in his time used yarrow to stop bleeding more effectively than any other plant available. You've seen it and probably cursed it. Yarrow grows in lawns, along roadsides, at the edges of fields. Anywhere disturbed soil gets sunlight. The leaves are feathery and finely divided, almost fern-like, with a distinctive, sharp, slightly camphor-like smell when crushed between your fingers. On the flower heads are flat-topped clusters of tiny white or sometimes pale pink blossoms, and the stems are tough and fibrous, hard to snap cleanly. It feels like a plant that was built to endure, because it was. The antibacterial and hemostatic activity of yarrow has been confirmed across multiple studies. Research published in Phytotherapy. Research identified antibacterial activity against both gram-positive and gram-negative organisms. The key compounds include chamazoline, which has anti-inflammatory properties, and acylene, which promotes blood clotting. That's why battlefield medics used it. It fights infection and stops bleeding simultaneously. A double function from a single plant. People still use yarrow in poultice form for minor cuts and wounds, and as a tea for fever and cold symptoms. Traditional herbalists across Europe considered it one of the essential simples, plants that could be used alone, without complex preparation, to address common ailments directly. Its forgotten status isn't because it stopped working, it's because gauze pads and ibuprofen are easier to grab off a shelf. Yarrow requires you to know what it looks like, where to find it, and how to use it. Convenience killed the relationship. It's like having a field surgeon growing in your backyard, one who's been on duty for 3,000 years and never once clocked out. And if yarrow is the battlefield medic in your lawn, the next one is the silent guardian in your spice rack. Thyme, the lung cleaner. Thymus vulgaris. You've sprinkled it on chicken. You've probably got a dried jar of it behind the paprika right now. Right? What you may not know is that thyme has one of the longest continuous records of medicinal use of any culinary herb in the Western world, and its primary compound is so effective as an antimicrobial that it became the active ingredient in one of the most widely sold hygiene products on the planet. That compound is thymol, and thymol is the original antiseptic base of Listerine mouthwash. When Joseph Lawrence formulated Listerine in the 1870s, he built it around thymol extracted from thyme oil, because thymol kills bacteria in the mouth more effectively than almost anything else available at the time. A study in the journal Medicinal Chemistry found thymol demonstrated remarkable antibacterial effects against respiratory and oral pathogens. It disrupts bacterial cell membranes, on essentially punching holes in the walls that keep bacteria alive. But the history goes far deeper than mouthwash. During the plague years in medieval Europe, monks cultivated thyme in monastery gardens specifically for its antiseptic properties. Rooms were fumigated with burning thyme to ward off contagion. Roman soldiers bathed in thyme water before battle, both for courage, they believed, and to prevent wound infection. In traditional European herbalism, thyme tea was the standard remedy for respiratory infections, coughs, and bronchitis for centuries. Pick a sprig of fresh thyme and roll it between your fingers. The leaves are tiny, oval, slightly fuzzy, and release an intense aromatic oil that smells clean and sharp, almost medicinal even before preparation. The stems are woody and thin. The flavor is warm and slightly peppery. These sensory signatures are the volatile oils doing their work even in the air. One meta-analysis of thyme's respiratory applications found it surprisingly effective for bronchitis and upper respiratory symptoms, particularly in combination with ivy leaf extract. People use thyme tea, thyme oil steam inhalation, and thyme-infused honey for stubborn coughs and chest congestion. It's one of the most accessible antibacterial plants in the world. Already in your kitchen, already in your mouthwash, and you never connected the dots. The pattern should be forming now. Common plants, real science, documented power, replaced not because they failed, but because they couldn't be owned. And here's the thing, everything we've covered so far, that's the mild section. If you're starting to see your kitchen and your lawn differently, good. That means it's working. But we're about to cross into the plans that will genuinely change how you think about what's possible. If this is already reshaping how you see things, share it. This knowledge shouldn't stay buried. Now we shift. The plants in Act 1 were familiar. Things you've cooked with, walked past, maybe even pulled out of the ground and thrown away. What comes next is different. These are the plants that made entire medical traditions take notice. The ones with clinical trial data that raised eyebrows. The ones carried across continents because they were too important to leave behind. We're entering the zone where folk remedy starts to sound like a lazy label for something that actually works. And the gap between what's growing in fields and what's sold in pharmacies starts to look less like progress and more like forgetting. Echinacea, the prairie sentinel, Echinacea purpurea. If you've seen a purple coneflower growing wild in a meadow or a garden border, you've seen Echinacea. The flower heads are striking, drooping purple-pink petals surrounding a spiny dome-shaped seed cone that's rough to the touch, almost like a tiny hedgehog. The stems are coarse and hairy. The roots, when dug up, smell faintly sweet and produce a distinctive tingling sensation on the tongue. That's the alkamides at work, the compounds modern research has identified as key immune modulators. For the Great Plains nations, the Cheyenne, the Lakota, the Pawnee, Echinacea was one of the most widely used medicinal plants in their systems. The Cheyenne used it for sore throats and mouth pain. The Pawnee used it for headaches and as an analgesic. The Lakota used it for snakebite, infections, and pain. When European settlers encountered these uses, some adopted them through the eclectic medicine movement in the 19th century, making Echinacea one of the first Native American medicinal plants to cross into Western herbalism at scale. Modern research has been both extensive and debated, which is worth stating honestly. A 2007 meta-analysis published in the Lancet Infectious Diseases found that Echinacea reduced the incidence of the common cold by 58% and the duration of colds by 1.4 days. That's significant. But other trials have produced mixed results, and the variability often comes down to preparation. Which species, which part of the plant, how it was extracted. The immune modulation mechanism involves stimulation of macrophages and increased production of cytokines, essentially sounding an alarm in the immune system that mobilizes defenses faster. People use Echinacea tinctures and teas at the onset of cold symptoms, particularly in the first 48 hours. The traditional framing is immune booster, though the more accurate description is immune activator. It doesn't build a stronger system so much as wake up the one you have. Evidence is stronger for reducing cold incidence than for treating infections already underway, and some herbalists note it's less effective with prolonged continuous use. Why was it sidelined? Partly because the research got messy. Too many products, too many variables. Partly because you can grow it in a garden. And partly because an immune-activating plant that prevents colds doesn't generate the recurring revenue that cold medications do. Echinacea is the early warning system you didn't know was standing guard, like a watchtower on the prairie, quietly doing its job while everyone looked elsewhere. This next one goes deeper, literally. Golden seal, the yellow root warrior, Hydrastis canadensis. If Echinacea is the alarm system, golden seal is the targeted strike. This is a plant that looks unassuming growing wild, low to the ground in the shaded understory of eastern North American forests, with broad, lobed leaves and a single small greenish-white flower that most people walk past without a second glance. But snap the root and everything changes. Inside, it's a vivid, almost startling yellow, the color of turmeric or saffron. And that color is berberine, one of the most extensively studied antimicrobial alkaloids in modern phytochemistry. The Cherokee used golden seal as a wash for skin infections and eye inflammation. It became one of the cornerstone plants of eclectic medicine in the 1800s. American doctors who integrated botanical treatments into clinical practice used golden seal for mucous membrane infections, digestive complaints, and topical wound care. By the early 20th century, it was one of the best-selling herbal medicines in North America. The modern research on berberine is substantial. A review in the journal Frontiers in Microbiology documented berberine's activity against a wide range of pathogens including E. coli, Staphylococcus aureus, Streptococcus, and Candida species. The mechanism is multifaceted. Berberine interferes with bacterial DNA replication, disrupts cell membrane integrity, and inhibits biofilm formation, which is the sticky protective matrix that makes certain infections so hard to treat. One clinical trial found berberine as effective as the drug metformin for certain metabolic markers, though that crosses into metabolic research rather than purely antimicrobial. The texture of the fresh root is dense and woody, and the taste is intensely bitter, mouth-puckering bitter, which in traditional herbal logic was itself considered a sign of potent medicine. People use golden seal as a tincture, a tea, for the brave, or in capsule form, primarily for digestive infections, sore throats, and sinus issues. But here's the necessary caution. Golden seal has been so popular that it's now considered at risk in the wild due to overharvesting. It grows slowly, prefers specific forest conditions, and doesn't cultivate easily at scale. Responsible use means sourcing from cultivated supplies, not wild harvesting. And berberine in high doses or prolonged use can interact with medications and affect liver function, so this is one where powerful also means respect the dosage. Not every traditional plant is gentle. Some are potent precisely because their chemistry is aggressive. The reason golden seal faded from mainstream awareness follows the same pattern. It can't be patented, it grows in forests, and pharmaceutical antibiotics arrived promising faster, standardized results. But berberine never stopped working. It just stopped being marketed. It's like a special forces operator who got reassigned to desk duty. The skills never went anywhere. And if you think berberine sounds serious, wait until you hear what's hiding in your pizza seasoning. Oregano, the Mediterranean shield, Oreganum vulgar. This is the one that tends to make people laugh when they first hear about it, and then stop laughing when they see the research. Because oregano oil, not the dried flakes you shake onto a slice, but the concentrated essential oil extracted from wild Mediterranean oregano, contains one of the most potent antibacterial compounds found in any culinary plant on Earth. That compound is carvacrol, and carvacrol has been shown in study after study to demolish bacterial cell membranes. A landmark paper published in the Journal of Applied Microbiology found oregano oil effective against 25 different bacterial strains, including multiple drug-resistant organisms. Another study in the journal Frontiers in Microbiology described carvacrol as having remarkable antimicrobial properties with potential applications against foodborne pathogens and clinical infections alike. The mechanism is direct. Carvacrol integrates into the bacterial membrane, increases its permeability, and causes the cell contents to leak out. The bacteria essentially dissolve. Hippocrates, the actual father of Western medicine, documented oregano's use for respiratory and digestive ailments in the 4th century BCE. Greek soldiers washed wounds with oregano-infused preparations. In medieval Europe, it was a staple of monastery apothecaries. Across the Middle East, wild oregano was used in food preservation long before refrigeration, not for taste, but because it stopped meat from going bad. The antibacterial function was the primary value. The flavor was a bonus. Fresh oregano has small, rounded leaves that feel slightly fuzzy between your fingers, and when you crush them, the release of volatile oils is immediate. A warm, sharp, almost medicinal scent that clears the sinuses. Wild oregano growing on rocky Mediterranean hillsides tends to produce far higher concentrations of carvacrol than garden varieties, which is why the distinction between culinary oregano and medicinal oregano oil matters. They are the same species, but the potency varies enormously with growing conditions. And people use oregano oil, diluted, for throat infections, digestive issues, and skin applications. Some take it in capsule form at the first sign of a cold. The qualification here is important. Concentrated oregano oil is strong enough to burn skin if applied undiluted. It's not the gentle herb from your pantry. It's concentrated plant chemistry, and it demands the same respect you'd give any potent antimicrobial agent. The reason this one stays off most people's radar is almost comical. It's pizza seasoning. The mental association is so strong that the idea of oregano as serious medicine sounds like a joke. But the bacteria it kills don't find it funny. It's like finding out the quiet librarian is a former cage fighter. The packaging doesn't match the power. Now keep going, and because the next one comes from a place most Western herbalism never looks. The forests of Aboriginal Australia. Tea tree, the surgeon's backup. Melaleuca alternifolia. This is not a tree you'd find in most Northern Hemisphere gardens. It's native to the swampy coastal regions of New South Wales, Australia, where it grows as a small, papery-barked tree with narrow aromatic leaves that release a sharp, clean, camphor-like scent when crushed. The texture of the leaves is thin and slightly oily. The bark peels in layers. And for Aboriginal Australians, particularly the Bundjalung people, this tree has been central to wound care and infection treatment for generations that stretch far beyond written records. The Bundjalung crushed the leaves into poultices, brewed them into wound washes, and inhaled the steam for respiratory relief. When European settlers encountered these practices, most dismissed them. It wasn't until the 1920s that Arthur Penfold, an Australian chemist, formally tested tea tree oil and found its antiseptic activity was 13 times stronger than carbolic acid, the standard hospital disinfectant of the era. That finding should have changed everything. Instead, the arrival of pharmaceutical antibiotics pushed tea tree oil into the margins for decades. Modern research brought it roaring back. The primary active compound, terpenin 4-ol, has been shown to disrupt bacterial cell membranes and interfere with cellular respiration. A study published in Clinical Microbiology Reviews described tea tree oil as having broad-spectrum antimicrobial activity, effective against bacteria, fungi, and even some viruses. Multiple clinical trials have tested it against MRSA, colonization on skin, with a 2004 study finding that a tea tree oil regimen was as effective as standard mupirocin treatment for decolonizing MRSA carriers. Hospital studies have explored its use in hand washes and surface disinfectants as part of infection control protocols. People use diluted tea tree oil topically for acne, fungal infections, minor cuts, and insect bites. It's one of the few essential oils that has earned genuine clinical credibility rather than just traditional reputation. The scent alone is distinctive enough to trigger recognition. Once you've smelled tea tree, you always know it. Why marginalized? The same reason as the rest. A natural product can't be patented, and when penicillin arrived, anything botanical looked old-fashioned. But tea tree oil never needed a patent to work. It's the backup surgeon that conventional medicine keeps calling back whenever the frontline drugs start failing, particularly now as antibiotic resistance makes the search for alternatives urgent again. If you're realizing that this list keeps getting more powerful with every entry, you're paying attention. Because the next one is a plant so effective that an entire subcontinent built a medical system around it. Neem, the village pharmacy. Azadirachta indica. In India, neem has been called the tree of 40 cures and the village drugstore, not as marketing, but as practical description. A single neem tree growing in a village courtyard was historically the source of treatments for skin infections, dental disease, intestinal parasites, fevers, and wound care. Every part of the tree, leaves, bark, seeds, oil, has documented traditional use spanning thousands of years in Ayurvedic medicine. The leaves are pinnate with serrated edges, rows of small toothed leaflets along a central stem, and they have an intensely bitter taste that makes golden seal seem mild by comparison. The smell of neem oil is pungent, garlicky, and sulfurous, not pleasant by any standard, which is partly why Western herbalism never embraced it the way Eastern systems did. Medicine doesn't have to smell good to work, and neem works. The active compounds are numerous. Nimbidin provides anti-inflammatory and antimicrobial activity. Azadirachtin, the most studied neem compound, has demonstrated antibacterial, antifungal, and antiparasitic effects. On a review published in Current Medicinal Chemistry, documented neem's activity against over a dozen bacterial species, including Salmonella, E. coli, and Staphylococcus aureus. Studies in the Journal of Ethnopharmacology confirmed traditional dental applications, chewing neem twigs, a practice still common across South Asia and East Africa, significantly reduces oral bacterial load. One study called Neem-Based Oral Care, comparable to chlorhexidine mouthwash in reducing plaque-associated bacteria. In East Africa, neem has been used independently of the Ayurvedic tradition for malaria symptoms, skin conditions, and gastrointestinal complaints. The convergence, two separate continental traditions arriving at the same applications for the same tree, is exactly the kind of cross-cultural validation that makes dismissing traditional knowledge increasingly difficult. People use neem leaf tea, neem oil topical applications, and neem bark preparations for a range of concerns. The taste makes it a commitment. The smell makes it unmistakable. But for billions of people across the tropics, neem isn't exotic. It's the tree in the yard, the one grandmothers point to when someone gets sick. Why isn't it in every pharmacy worldwide? Partly geography, neem is tropical, partly sensory. Westerners don't tolerate bitter sulfurous medicine well. And partly economics, you can't patent a tree that half the world's population already has access to. Everything you've heard so far, the kitchen herbs, the lawn plants, the garden flowers, the tropical trees, these are the accessible tier. They're powerful, they're real, but they're not the peak. Now we cross into the legendary ones, the plants with histories so dramatic they sound invented, backed by research so strong it changed modern medicine. Hold on, because the next section is where you'll stop thinking of any of this as casual. We're entering different territory now. The plants in Act 1 grew in your yard. The plants in Act 2 lived in your kitchen or your garden. The ones ahead, these are the ones that survived plagues, won Nobel Prizes, and kept people alive in conditions where nothing else was available. These are the plants that pharmaceutical companies studied, extracted single molecules from, and turned into blockbuster drugs, while the whole plant sat forgotten in a field somewhere, still doing what it always did. Wormwood, the Nobel Prize plant. Specifically, sweet wormwood, Artemisia annua. If there's one plant on this list that proves the gap between traditional knowledge and modern medicine is thinner than anyone admits, it's this one. Because in the year 340 AD, a Chinese physician named Ge Hong wrote a manual called Emergency Prescriptions Kept Up One Sleeve, and in that text he described soaking qinghao, sweet wormwood, in cold water, wringing it out, and drinking the juice to treat intermittent fevers. That description sat in Chinese medical archives for over 1,600 years. In the 1970s, during a secret Chinese military research project called Project 523, a pharmaceutical chemist named Tu Yuyu was tasked with finding a treatment for malaria, which was devastating troops. She combed through thousands of traditional Chinese medical recipes. When she reached Ge Hong's text, something clicked. The cold water extraction was unusual. Most traditional preparations used heat. Tu Yuyu realized that heat might be destroying the active compound. She switched to a low-temperature ether extraction, isolated a molecule she called Qinghaosu, later named artemisinin, and tested it. It killed the malaria parasite with extraordinary efficiency. Artemisinin became the foundation of modern malaria treatment worldwide. The WHO now considers artemisinin-based combination therapies the gold standard for treating falciparum malaria. In 2015, Tu won the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine, the first Chinese woman to receive a Nobel in a scientific category, and her breakthrough came directly from a 1,600-year-old herbal text. The plant itself is tall, feathery, with finely divided aromatic leaves that smell sharp and herbaceous, somewhere between sage and chrysanthemum. It grows easily in temperate climates and is, frankly, unremarkable to look at. But the antimicrobial research extends beyond malaria. Studies published in journals, including Antimicrobial Agents and Chemotherapy, have documented artemisinin's activity against various bacterial species and even some drug-resistant organisms. The compound disrupts iron-dependent processes in pathogens, essentially weaponizing their own metabolic pathways against them. This is the plant from the hook. The one with 2,000 years of documented use. The one that became a modern drug. And the lesson isn't just about artemisinin, it's about what else might be sitting in traditional archives, waiting for someone to take it seriously. A 16th century herbal text isn't a clinical trial, but when a clinical trial confirms what the text already said, maybe the text deserves more respect. If that one gave you chills, the next one is going to add another layer, because it doesn't even look like a plant. Usnea, old man's beard. This one is technically a lichen, not a plant, a symbiotic organism of fungus and algae that hangs from tree branches like pale green-gray threads, swaying in the forest breeze. You've seen it in old-growth forests, draped over Douglas fir and spruce, like something from a fairy tale. The texture is wiry and slightly elastic. Pull a strand and it reveals a white inner cord, which is one way to distinguish it from similar-looking species. It smells faintly of forest and earth, barely there unless you press it close. And this unassuming lichen has been used as a wound treatment and infection fighter across cultures that never had contact with each other. Scandinavian traditional medicine used Usnea for respiratory and urinary infections. Chinese traditional medicine documented it under the name Songluo for similar applications. Native American nations, particularly in the Pacific Northwest, used it as wound packing and for throat infections. The cross-cultural convergence is striking. 3 independent medical systems on 3 continents, all identifying the same organism for the same purpose. The compound responsible is usnic acid, and its antibacterial profile is genuinely impressive. A review in the journal Phytomedicine documented usnic acid's strong activity against gram-positive bacteria, including Staphylococcus aureus, streptococcus, and enterococcus species. The mechanism involves disruption of bacterial oxidative phosphorylation, essentially cutting off the energy supply that bacteria need to survive. Some studies have also noted antiviral and antifungal activity, making usnic acid a broad-spectrum antimicrobial from a source most people wouldn't think to examine. People use Usnea in tincture form, primarily for respiratory infections and sore throats. Traditional preparation involves long soak extraction in alcohol, as usnic acid isn't particularly water-soluble. Another case where traditional methods reflect an intuitive understanding of chemistry that modern science later confirmed. The safety caveat here is real. Usnic acid in concentrated supplemental form has been associated with liver toxicity in some cases, particularly in weight loss products that used it irresponsibly. Traditional use, tinctures, moderate doses, short duration, has a much longer safety record. The dose makes the medicine, and the dose also makes the poison. That's been true since Paracelsus said it 500 years ago. Why forgotten? Because lichen doesn't fit any commercial category. You can't farm it efficiently. You can't standardize it easily. And most people who see it on a tree think it's a sign of forest decay rather than a source of medicine. It hangs there in the canopy like an old, quiet secret. The beard of the forest itself, producing antimicrobial compounds around the clock while we walk underneath without looking up. It's like discovering the forest has its own immune system, and it's been sharing it for free. Now, for one most people in the West have never heard of. And that's exactly the point. Cryptolepis, the West African secret weapon. Cryptolepis sanguinolenta. This climbing vine with small yellow flowers grows in the tropical forests of West Africa, and in Ghanaian traditional medicine, it has been a primary treatment for fevers and infections for centuries. The root is the medicinal part. When cut, it exudes a deep reddish-orange sap that stains everything it touches, which is how it earned its species name, sanguinolenta, meaning blood red. The texture of the dried root bark is woody and fibrous, and preparations traditionally involve boiling it into a strong decoction, a dark, intensely bitter tea that Ghanaian healers prescribed for malaria, urinary tract infections, and gastrointestinal illness. This wasn't casual folk practice. Cryptolepis was so widely used and trusted in Ghana that it became one of the first African traditional medicines to be formally studied in clinical settings as an antimalarial. The primary alkaloid, cryptolepine, has been the subject of increasing research attention over the past 2 decades. Studies published in the Journal of Ethnopharmacology and Phytotherapy Research have documented cryptolepine's activity against Plasmodium falciparum, the deadliest malaria parasite, as well as broad-spectrum antibacterial effects. A particularly notable study found cryptolepine effective against multiple drug-resistant bacterial strains, including resistant staphylococcus and enterococcus. One research group described its mechanism as involving DNA intercalation. The compound inserts itself into the bacterial DNA helix and disrupts replication. That's a mechanism shared by some of the most powerful synthetic antibiotics. The qualification is important here. Cryptolepis is not widely accessible outside West Africa. The research, while promising, is still in relatively early stages compared to plants like garlic or thyme. Clinical trials are limited. But what makes Cryptolepis significant for this list isn't just its chemistry, it's what it represents. Thousands of traditional medicine systems around the world contain plants that have never been studied by Western science. Cryptolepis got studied because a few researchers listened to Ghanaian healers. How many other plants are still waiting? Why unknown? Because West African traditional pharmacopoeia has been systematically under-researched and underfunded. Because tropical plants from developing nations don't attract pharmaceutical investment the way temperate zone plants do. And because the geopolitics of medical research have historically concentrated resources in the global north, while the global south's knowledge systems went unexamined. Cryptolepis is a reminder that the most powerful medicine might not be in any system you've been taught to look at. It's a locked door in a library nobody visits, and the key is just listening. The next plant, though, this one everybody's heard of. They just don't know what it actually does. Myrrh, the ancient antibiotic. Commiphora myrrha, you've heard the name? It shows up in Christmas stories, ancient trade routes, and perfume histories. Most people file it under expensive old-timey gift and move on. But myrrh isn't a relic. It's one of the most consistently documented antimicrobial resins in the history of human medicine, and modern research is finally explaining why it kept showing up in every ancient pharmacy from the Nile Delta to the Ganges. Myrrh is a resin, a sticky, aromatic gum that bleeds from the bark of small, thorny commiphora trees growing in the dry, harsh landscapes of the Horn of Africa and the Arabian Peninsula. The raw resin comes in irregular reddish-brown lumps that look like hardened amber. We crack one open and the inside is slightly translucent, with a warm, bitter, smoky scent that's been described as medicinal incense. The texture is brittle but becomes gummy when warmed. The taste is intensely bitter, almost unbearably so, which ancient pharmacists interpreted as a marker of strong medicine. The Egyptians used myrrh in embalming, not just for spiritual purposes, but because it prevented decomposition, which is fundamentally an antibacterial function. The Ebers Papyrus, dating to approximately 1550 BCE, prescribes myrrh for wound infections. In the Unani medical system, myrrh was classified as a key antiseptic. Traditional Chinese medicine used it, called mo yao, for pain, inflammation, and blood circulation. Biblical references to myrrh span multiple books and applications, from temple incense to wound treatment. The modern research targets myrrh's terpenoid compounds, particularly cursarine and furanodiene. A study in the journal Letters in Applied Microbiology found myrrh extract effective against both gram-positive and gram-negative bacteria, including clinical isolates resistant to conventional antibiotics. Research published in the Journal of Dental Research documented myrrh-based mouthwash significantly reducing oral pathogens and gum inflammation. And a fascinating area of current study involves myrrh's ability to disrupt bacterial biofilms, those protective layers that make chronic infections so difficult to eradicate. Myrrh demonstrated significant antibiofilm properties. One review in the journal Molecules concluded, people use myrrh tinctures for oral health, throat infections, and topical wound care. It's available as a resin, or as a tincture, or an essential oil, and it's considerably more accessible than most people realize. Why sidelined? Because a bitter-tasting tree resin from East Africa doesn't fit the modern pharmacy model. Because the name carries so much historical and religious baggage that people forget it was always medicine first and gift second. It's like inheriting a sword and using it as a wall decoration. You forgot what it was made for. We're close now. 2 more. And these last 2 bring everything full circle. If you've stayed this far, something has shifted. The way you're hearing these names, garlic, yarrow, oregano, myrrh, they don't sound the same anymore. They can't. Because you've seen the pattern too many times now. Common plants, documented power, replaced by convenience. And every single one of them is still here, still growing, still producing the same compounds that made them essential to every civilization that paid attention. These last 2 plants aren't the rarest. They're not the most exotic. They're the ones that bring this whole list home. Because they prove that the most validated, most accessible, and most broadly useful antibacterial plants are still the ones you can find without going farther than your own neighborhood. Elderberry, the pandemic plant. Sambucus nigra. The European elder has been called the medicine chest of the people, a phrase attributed to herbalist tradition stretching back centuries. And it earned that name by being available to everyone, regardless of wealth or status. Elder trees grow along hedgerows, at the edges of fields, beside old buildings, and in disturbed woodland across Europe and North America. They're recognizable by their compound leaves, their flat-topped clusters of tiny cream-colored flowers in spring, and their heavy, drooping bunches of small, dark purple-black berries in late summer. The flowers smell sweet and musty. The berries, when ripe, stain your fingers deep purple. The wood is soft and pithy. Every part of the plant has been used in some tradition, though the berries and flowers dominate modern practice. During the 1995 Panama flu epidemic, elderberry extract was used in a clinical study that found participants taking elderberry recovered an average of 4 days faster than the placebo group. A 2019 meta-analysis published in Complementary Therapies in Medicine concluded that elderberry supplementation substantially reduced upper respiratory symptoms. The active compounds, anthocyanins and flavonoids, have demonstrated both antiviral and antibacterial activity in laboratory settings. A study in the journal BMC, Complementary Medicine and Therapies, found elderberry extract inhibited bacterial growth and enhanced the effect of antibiotics when used in combination, suggesting synergistic potential. The mechanism involves multiple pathways. Elderberry compounds appear to prevent viral and bacterial adhesion to cell membranes, modulate inflammatory cytokines, and support immune cell activity. It's not a single target drug. It's a broad-spectrum support system that works through collaboration rather than brute force. People use elderberry syrup, elderberry gummies, elderberry tea, and elderberry tincture, primarily during cold and flu season. It's one of the best-selling herbal supplements in the world and has been for years. The critical safety note: raw elderberries, elder bark, and elder leaves contain cyanogenic glycosides that can cause nausea and illness. Elderberries must be cooked before consumption. The traditional preparation methods, simmering into syrups, fermenting into wine, weren't just for taste. They were necessary detoxification steps. Ancestors knew this. They cooked their elderberries not because they liked warm drinks, but because they learned, probably the hard way, that the raw fruit makes you sick. Why is elderberry both everywhere and still underestimated? Because it occupies an awkward middle ground, too well known to feel like a secret, too botanical to earn full pharmaceutical respect. Doctors rarely recommend it. Pharmacies shelve it in the supplement aisle with a shrug. And yet the research keeps accumulating, the traditional record keeps being validated, and every autumn, the berries keep appearing on those same hedgerow trees, offering what they've always offered. It's like a free health insurance policy that renews every September, hanging right there on the branch, waiting for someone to remember how to use it. One more. And this last one might be the most important of all, not because it's the strongest, but because it's the most complete. Turmeric, the golden shield. Curcuma longa. There's a good chance this is already in your spice cabinet, sitting in a small jar of bright orange-yellow powder that stains everything it touches. If you've ever handled fresh turmeric root, you know the experience. It looks like a more orange version of ginger, with rough, ringed skin and an interior so intensely golden it looks dyed. The smell is warm, earthy, slightly peppery. The taste is bitter and mildly astringent, with a back-of-the-throat warmth that lingers. And every one of those sensory characteristics is a signature of the compound that's made turmeric one of the most studied plant substances in the history of pharmacology. That compound is curcumin, and curcumin has been the subject of over 15,000 peer-reviewed studies. A number that itself sounds unbelievable until you start looking at the breadth of what researchers have investigated. Antibacterial activity, anti-inflammatory mechanisms, antioxidant capacity, biofilm disruption, wound healing acceleration, immune modulation. The research portfolio is staggering. A review published in the journal Biofactors described curcumin as possessing remarkable antimicrobial properties, effective against bacteria, fungi, and viruses. Studies in antimicrobial agents and chemotherapy have documented curcumin's ability to enhance the effectiveness of conventional antibiotics, particularly against resistant strains, essentially making drugs work better when paired with this ancient compound. But turmeric didn't need modern research to know its value. It has been a cornerstone of Ayurvedic medicine for over 4,000 years. In India, turmeric paste, haldi, was applied to wounds, mixed into warm milk for respiratory infections, and consumed daily as a preventive tonic. Traditional Chinese medicine documented turmeric for pain, inflammation, and digestive complaints. South Indonesian traditional medicine used it for liver and skin conditions. Hawaiian healers used a related species for ear infections and sinus issues. The global convergence is overwhelming. Dozens of independent traditions, spanning millennia, all centering the same golden root. Here's the brilliant twist that shows traditional wisdom outpacing modern pharmaceutical understanding. Curcumin has notoriously poor bioavailability. Taken on its own, the body absorbs very little of it. Modern supplement companies spent years trying to solve this problem with liposomal delivery systems and nanoparticle formulations. But Ayurvedic practitioners solved it centuries ago. They combined turmeric with black pepper and fat. Piperine, the active compound in black pepper, increases curcumin absorption by up to 2,000%. And the traditional preparation wasn't random. It was bioavailability engineering before the concept existed. People used turmeric in golden milk preparations, as a cooking spice, in supplement capsules, often paired with piperine, and as a topical paste for skin issues. The daily inclusion model, A little turmeric in food every day rather than a large dose when sick mirrors Ayurvedic philosophy of food as medicine and prevention as practice. The honest qualification: while the volume of research is enormous, some scientists caution that curcumin's chemical properties make it prone to false positives in certain laboratory assays. It can appear to do things in a test tube that don't translate to the body. The clinical evidence is strongest for anti-inflammatory and joint health applications. The antibacterial applications, while supported by laboratory data and traditional use, are still being refined in clinical settings. But even the most skeptical reviewers acknowledge that the traditional integration of turmeric into daily diet across South and Southeast Asia correlates with population-level health patterns that deserve serious attention. Why isn't turmeric taken more seriously as medicine in the West? Because it's a cooking spice, because it costs pennies, because it turns your cutting board yellow and your supplements can't be patented. The Golden Shield doesn't need a prescription. It just needs someone to remember it's been working for 4,000 years. And the science is still catching up. These 15 plants aren't miracles. They're not going to replace your doctor. They're not going to cure diseases with a single cup of tea. What they are, every single one of them, is documented, tested by time, examined by science, available to you, and most of them are growing somewhere within walking distance of where you're sitting right now. That's the list: 15 plants, thousands of years of documented use across dozens of cultures, hundreds of modern studies confirming what healers already knew, and almost all of them growing wild in the margins your world told you were worthless: the ditches, the vacant lots, the sidewalk cracks, the forest floor, the hedgerow at the edge of the parking lot. Remember the beginning, that plantain pushing through the cracked sidewalk outside the pharmacy? You saw it differently then. It was a weed, a nuisance, something to spray or step over. Now you know what it actually is, and you know it's not alone. The next time you walk past a ditch full of yarrow, a thyme plant gone wild at the garden's edge, an elder tree heavy with dark berries, a patch of plantain flat against the earth, you won't see what you used to see. You'll see what your great-grandparents saw, what soldiers carried, what healers prescribed, what science confirmed. Not a pharmacy in a bottle, a pharmacy in the ground. The knowledge was never lost. It was just waiting for you to look down.